guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I'm going to be reviewing Renegades by Marissa Meyer, the first book in the now Renegades trilogy, as earlier this year, Renegades was extended to not just a duology, but a trilogy, which, holy mother of God, am I excited for after reading this book. I picked Renegades as one of the two books that I was going to be reading for Tome Topple. Basically, during Tome Topple, I am completing 3 challenges by reading more than one book, as I am reading 2, and this one, which counted for a book that is a part of a series. Like I said, this is the first installment of this series, and I really honestly loved it. This first book packed such a big punch that it is absolutely astounding. So let me get into what the story is about for those of you who have not heard of the story before. The best way that I've been able to describe this to people that I've talked to after reading this is that it's got a mix of Marvel's X-Men and Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Marvel's Legends of Tomorrow, all things which I really enjoy separately. And I love the Marvel franchise like no tomorrow. So if you are a huge fan of the Marvel franchise, I think you would really enjoy this book because it's got things like superheroes and powers and all kinds of political intrigue, and it's got this entire city dedicated to the superheroes, and the banter is absolutely wonderful between these characters. It honestly feels like the kind of banter that they do in the Marvel movies between all the characters, but it feels so much more like it would be a TV show. So something like Legends of Tomorrow or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is kind of what I get from this, more so than just the Marvel movies themselves. But I just really enjoy this book for so many reasons, and without further ado, let me get into some of those reasons. So the main plot of this story is this centers around a town named Gatlin, which is comprised of not just humans, but people that are called prodigies, or those who have some kind of superpower. Now, there are 2 different camps of prodigies. There are the anarchists, who essentially had taken over Gatlin for about 20 years, where everything was in disarray and in chaos, and there really was more of freedom with the prodigies and able to use their powers. Then there are the Renegades, which are kind of more of the good guys within this kind of society, and they ended up wiping out the anarchists, or most of the anarchists, and had essentially taken over, trying to make the world a better place, a lot cleaner, and essentially try to get things kind of back to the way they used to be, but allowing prodigies to still be able to live in society and flourish alongside with normal everyday humans. The story is broken up into 2 perspectives as we follow an anarchist and a renegade, both of whom are fighting for what they believe is right. We have Nova, the anarchist, who has lived her whole life hating the renegades after they did not show up to protect her family when she was very young, and her ability is that she is not only able to stay awake a lot of the time, but she is able to put people to sleep at her touch. So a lot of the story is divvied up for her in terms of her trying to infiltrate the renegades and try to bring them down from the inside, as she has nothing but pure hatred for this group of people for the fact that they never ended up protecting her family, and then later on killed someone else that she was very close to, who was actually the leader of the anarchists themselves. Then we have Adrian Everhart, who is not only a renegade, but he is essentially what I would consider the golden child of the story, as he is the adopted son of the 2 leaders of the Renegades, and he has a whole interesting backstory with him as far as kind of how that came to be, how he became to be adopted by 2 males that are in a romantic relationship, and a lot of his story is focusing on trying to just make things better for everyone. The thing is with Adrian, he has his own secrets. Despite being so for the Renegades and doing what they think is right, he has his own agenda of sorts and tries to keep that secret from everyone in the Renegades, as it's not something they would particularly be fond of. The thing about this book that I actually think I loved the most was the world building that was involved with this story, because it not only fleshed out the entire city that is of Gatlin, but it fleshed out a lot of the everyday things that happen to these renegades, and the things that not only the renegades see from Adrian's side, but the anarchists see from Nova's side. Like, you really see the town in 2 different lights, based on these 2 different perspectives who are so different from each other. They are on opposite ends of the spectrum, and it really shows in the way that they describe this town and the way that they describe especially the people within this town and how they think that they view them and how they view other people within this world. It was so incredibly fascinating, And the best part is that Marissa Meyer didn't info dump. There were a lot of points in this story where new places would come up and there would be a trickling of information within, you know, the world and about this specific place and how it plays into the history of the town and all this stuff. It never felt like there was too much information brought in at any single point in time, as I feel like Marissa Meyer did a great job of being able to trickle in information as needed based on when things kind of came up and when they would have had people question them. And so she wanted to provide as many answers as she could to kind of keep that stuff in mind for a reader. Not only that, but I absolutely loved this writing style. I really don't know what it is about Marissa Meyer's writing with this book specifically that I enjoyed. It was very, very simplistic, very everyday language, but just felt so different between Nova and Adrian. Like, there was a complete difference in the tone of the writing style, in the way that things were said. It just felt so different. It almost felt like we had two different authors for each of these characters that were used in the story, and I just absolutely loved that, because I feel like each character needs to have their own voice and their own style. And even though this book is in third person, I will say that it isn't a third person narrative for both Adrian and Nova, it still had such a huge voice within it, even though it was third person. And I really, really appreciated that, because it really kind of made it easier for you to get into each section of the book and see kind of from which perspective we're looking through, just based on the tone. I loved the small romances that were involved with this. There is a huge romance that isn't even brought up until probably about 3/4 of the way through the book, and it is a slow burn, let me tell you. If you are a fan of slow burn relationships, this one has a huge one involved with it, because I'm not going to say who it is between, but it starts off with, you know, them kind of just getting to know each other. It's not insta-love in any way, because it takes them several weeks to even realize that they have feelings for each other of some kind, but there's so much that is blocking the two of them that keeps them from actually being in this relationship, that it just makes you want it so much more. And the entire time I'm reading this book, I'm just like, oh, my little heart is just bursting from all this cuteness and this adorableness, and I just want them to kiss already. You know, when you have characters like that where they're so romantically involved and they're so distanced from each other that you just want them to kiss, that's like the best thing to me as a fangirl. The best thing about it too is, because it is a slow burn, especially with the main romance involved with the story, is that it leaves so much room for growth and development in the second and now third book, because it is entirely possible, based on this story, that it could possibly go one way, it could go another way, it could go 50 million different ways, and the fact that it is so open in that way makes this romance kind of so much more enticing, because you are waiting to know whether or not things are going to end up the way you think, or if they're going to take a completely different turn. The action scenes within this story were so cinematic to me. Like, I kid you not, this book, this series will need to be a TV show. I need a Netflix series of Renegades by Marissa Meyer right now, because there are so many amazing action scenes that are so similar, I think, in construction and in feel to things from like the Avengers and the Marvel series and Legends of Tomorrow and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, everything about this book screams amazing action-packed TV show. Like, I would love to sit and binge watch this show if it was made into an actual thing. So, writers and directors, get on Renegades by Marissa Meyer. You won't be disappointed. The one negative that I really, really have with this story, and it's kind of more so nitpicky, so it's kind of, you know, anyone could really say that it's not that big of a point to where it would knock down any points for them, but for me, I felt that the ratio between Nova and Adrian's chapters was very, very off balanced. Nova has a much bigger presence in this story and almost makes it seem like this could have stood alone with just Nova's perspective. But because I love Adrian so much as a character, I wanted him to be able to have more to say in this book, but I kind of understand at the same point, because it kind of deals with convenience of plot, where Nova has more to do with the plot development than Adrian does. I just wish it would have been a little bit more balanced, but in the end, I understand it. It still just kind of bugged me a little bit that we just kind of had more Nova and not as much Adrian. I would be fine if it was more equal balanced, but it kind of wasn't, and I'm a little disappointed with that, but not too badly to where I'm knocking it down a full star. It was just something that kind of bugged me. Speaking of Nova and Adrian, the transitions also could have been a little bit better between chapters, because typically every chapter or so, every few chapters or so, is a change of perspective to from Nova to Adrian, or from Adrian to Nova, and there wasn't anything indicating whether or not we had switched perspectives until you got a little far into the chapter, maybe about a paragraph or so. As a reader, personally, I would have preferred there to have been something at the top of a chapter saying, oh, this is in Adrian's perspective, or this is in Nova's perspective. Again, something very, very nitpicky, but something that I think helps with the flow and the movement of the story a little bit better, because it gives the reader a chance to understand, okay, we are in a completely different perspective, we're probably in a different time at this point, so we need to kind of rework our brain to understand this is not anymore in Adrian or Nova's perspective, it's in the other person's. I will say though that I think one of the great themes of this book is the talk of heroism, and how just because you have superpowers doesn't always mean you can be heroic, and how even people who don't have any superpowers can still become heroes in their own right. That is a huge theme that is actually mentioned a lot in this book, and I really, really appreciate that, because it kind of makes this book seem very hopeful, and kind of makes the reader a lot more hopeful that they could go out and do something that is considered heroic, even though they don't have superpowers. And I think that that's a good point that Marissa Meyer points out, is because we're so bombarded today with all things relating to Marvel and DC, because of all the Avengers movies and the Justice League movies and all this stuff, that we almost sometimes forget that these superheroes aren't real, but you could be a superhero on your own without these powers by just doing things like making somebody smile. You know, the smallest things in the world that do good are going to carry over into someone else's day and make them kind of to continue this chain of good deeds and happiness. And that's kind of, I think, what we need more of in the world. The world is honestly such a dark and dismal place right now that we could all use a little bit of a superhero in our lives to kind of just make things a little easier to deal with, making just the next 5 minutes easier to deal with by making someone laugh, making someone smile, giving somebody the time of day to let off some steam if they're feeling stressed. Just little things like that can really make a difference in a person's life, and you don't have to have superpowers to be able to do it. I want to warn people, though, who do not like long chapters, that these chapters are a little bit on the longer side in some cases, but it kind of varies between, I would say, about 7 to 15 pages a chapter, but honestly, when you get kind of involved with the story, they feel shorter because you're flying through the book so much. At least that's what happened for me, because I found myself getting sucked into the story every time I picked it back up, and I would just fly through chapters like crazy, and I really enjoyed my entire time with this, and really just would recommend it to honestly anyone. Moving on to the characters. I cannot even begin to express how much I love all of these characters in this story. They are all my precious children, and they all must be protected at any cost, even some of the bad guys, except for Ingrid. Ingrid can go die in a hole for all I care, because she is an evil, evil witch. I think that the closest resemblance of my love for these characters I can think of is how I felt when I listened to The Diviners by Libba Bray, because not only do both these books have fantastic characters, but each character is unique, and not just their, personalities, but in their superpower abilities. Everyone's power in this story is very different from the next. Nobody has the same power to my knowledge, and honestly, everyone has amazing just qualities that I really, really admire. Even the villains. A lot of the villains have some really interesting qualities that I'm interested in exploring more and understanding more from their side. And the thing with this is you can't go into the story defining who is good and who is bad, because this book really delves into another idea of the fact that what you may think is good may not be to someone else, and what you may think is bad in one sense could be something that someone thinks is good for one reason or another. It kind of looks at this idea of assumption and making the point that you cannot always assume, at least, what somebody is doing is bad, because it might be something that they think is right. Not saying this for all cases. I'm not making this a blanket statement for everything in the world, but at least in this scenario of this book, there's a lot of questioning about what is right and what is wrong, and the further you get into the novel, that line really becomes blurred absurd, and these characters really have to decide what is right and what is wrong, because it's something that truly affects the way that they look at the world, and it's really, really interesting to delve into. The thing about the superheroes, like I said, and the powers, is that everyone's power is different. You have, like I said, Nova, who could put people to sleep. You have a character who is basically an embodiment of smoke. He's able to, like, use smoke to cover places and kind of slip through it. You have a character whose blood crystallizes into essentially not glass, but basically she can use it to stab people. You have a character who is literally a human bomb and can create bombs. You have a character who is, like, his skin can drip poison, and he is amazing with poison-filled equipment. You have a character who is able to embody the fears of the people he fights against. Like, every power within this story is so unique and different. And then you have your more typical powers, like fire and water and ice and all this stuff. But you have so many characters that have so many different abilities and powers, and they all use them to different they're all just so different and unique that it makes this, I think, so much more enjoyable, because you don't feel like you're bombarded with the same abilities again and again and again. It feels so fresh and so unique that I really, really would like to see this continue on and see more people further on in the story be brought up that have different powers as well. So all in all, despite the fact I love this book so much, I only ended up giving Renegades a 4.7 out of 5 stars. It is marked 5 on Goodreads though. The biggest reasons, like I said, is because I feel like the ratio of perspective was a little unbalanced, and the transitions would have been a lot nicer if there would have been a chapter caption of some kind, or a chapter title that indicates the person that we are viewing from. Those are so nitpicky things, and I totally understand how people can be really upset by those nitpicky things. But personally, I think that would have made this experience even better for me to read through Renegades. And it was a great experience by itself, but those things, I think, just make the reading experience a lot easier when things are balanced and things have better chapter captions or titles to where I understand, especially if there's multiple perspectives, who I am looking at, because it helps me get back into a mindset that makes it easier for me to understand who I am seeing and what I am seeing from them. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this review of Renegades. I hope you guys did enjoy it. If you did, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!